Sehr geehrte Damen und
Ladies and gentlemen, dear visitors, I would like to warmly welcome you to our event, our live stream event today in Brussels. And I'm delighted that you've followed invitation from Lucia Puttrich, the Minister for Federal and European Affairs of the State of Hessen. Today, the event is dealing with Documenta 15, and I would like to pass the floor to Secretary of State for European Affairs of the State of Hessen, Mark Weinmeister, for the welcome. Dear Minister Dorn, dear Mr. Bude, dear Mrs. Schormann and dear Mrs. Romahn, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to welcome you to our live stream concerning Documenta 15. I would also like to welcome you in the name of our Minister for Federal and European Affairs, Lucia Puttrich. Documenta is taking place in the metropolitan of the north of Hessen, Kassel, and it is the exhibition for contemporary art. It informs our perception of contemporary art, and it critically analyzes art in terms of the societal environment and sees art as a social event. The resulting public discourse is always seen as part and parcel of the installation of the Documenta itself, an art which cannot be locked into a physical frame, that cannot be stored in a box. It's art which explores and which intervenes. Documenta has now 66 years of experience. It was founded in 1955 and has collected a lot of experience. The state of Hessen holds it very dear, especially in the current pandemic situation, that Kassel continues to be the first and foremost address for art lovers in all of the world. Of course, Corona poses a very big challenge for Documenta, and especially the preparations for the exhibition. There have been a lot of limits posed on traveling, on contact, on exhibitions, and this has made life more difficult for artists and art lovers, of course. However, with Documenta 15, we would also like to pose a sign of courage and optimism. Today, we're especially talking about the new concept of Documenta. Mrs. Schormann is General Director of Documenta, and she's going to present the different facets and forms of the presentation that we'll have in 2022. We are really curious to learn more about the position of the artistic direction of Documenta. The next Documenta 15 is held under the artistic direction of the contemporary art collective Juan Guapa. It's the first time ever in its history that a group holds the artistic direction, and this group is composed of 10 artists and creatives coming from Jakarta and in Indonesia. Mr. Bude, Mrs. Schormann, we are really looking forward to hearing what you are going to tell us about Documenta 15.
für die Begrüßung.
Thank you very much for this warm welcome. I would like to give the floor to Angela Dorn, Minister for Research and the Arts of the State of Hessen, for a wonderful keynote speech. Ladies and gentlemen, I would myself like to warmly welcome you for Documenta 15. On behalf of the representation in Brussels, we are really happy about the big interest that exists concerning Documenta 15 for the next year, and also concerning the Documenta Institute, which was only founded 1 year ago. On the 18th June 2022, the next Documenta is going to start, which means that it is now in its peak phase of preparations, and this within these very difficult settings of the pandemic, which has asked a lot of adaptations for almost 1.5 years. All the different meetings between international artists and creatives could only take place in the digital area. And the collective from Indonesia, which is preparing the Documenta, had actually a big focus on meetings and exchange. This was important for the next Documenta. Luckily, now artists can come to Kassel to see where their projects are taking place. And Documenta 15, as much as all the precedent Documenta exhibitions, are an image of their times. It is posing questions and looking beyond limits of society. Contemporary topics are reflected, contemporary topics that concern the whole of society, and solutions are found in a creative way. Juan Grupa is taking up what happened in the past and is also carrying it further. It's an inscenation of societal images, and also the question whether we can continue to deal and whether we can continue to act with the system, the societal system, that can also be seen in art. Mrs. Schormann is going to tell you more about the Documenta 15. But just as interesting as the preparation of Documenta 15 is also the development of the Documenta Institute, where we are also currently in a high peak of preparations, which is the preparation of the first working program. Mr. Heinz, who is amongst the founding directors, and Brigitta Körst have now been supported by 2 further projects at University of Kassel, and the Documenta Institute is supported both by the Documenta Institute, the City of Kassel, and the Art College of Kassel. At the moment, the Documenta Institute has been supported structurally by the Documenta GmbH, but in the midterm, it will be linked to an alone standing institution. Multidisciplinary research is important, and its image and context is exactly what is needed for such an important worldwide project. The founding director of the Documenta Institute is going to give us further information on its profile and the preparations concerning the scientific approach. I'm looking forward to an interesting debate around the Institute and the Documenta 15. Thank you very much, Mrs. Dorn. I think it is time to go on to the discussion. We have Mrs. Schormann, who is also General Director of Documenta and the Museum Fridericianum GmbH, and Mr. Heinz Bude. He is he's the founding director of the Documenta Institute and working at the University of Kassel. All the participants are warmly invited to take part in the discussion. We're going to post how you can do this. You can either use the hotline or email to send in your questions. Mrs. Schormann, you have just come to us from a press conference and have followed recent development, have presented the recent developments of Documenta 15. My first question: for the first time in the history of Documenta, an artistic collective has been invited, so not just one curator, but an entire collective. Why did you do this? It's a wonderful question. Thank you very much, first of all, for this invitation, and a welcome to you all. The selection was done on an international level by a jury, and this jury has dealt with the questions: what would be important and relevant in current times, and how to represent this on an artistic level. This led to a discussion process which then led to the decision of an entire collective, because as Minister Dorn already said, in today's times, exchange, community, putting things together, collectivity, and building up together is one of the most important priorities. This is new, but what is most particular is that not only it's a collective, but it also comes from the south of the globe, which adds an entirely new viewpoint to the Documenta this time than in the past. Well, thank you very much. What is special? We have Lumbung, which is the rice barn in Indonesia as an artistic concept. It's a rice barn where people come together and share. You already mentioned this. Could you tell us something more about this artistic concept, Lumbung? And I think behind you we can see a poster with this concept. I'm wondering also whether there is a link to artistic positions of earlier Documenta exhibitions. So here we have a collective with a particular topic, but maybe in the past there was something similar already. Well, yes, there is, definitely. However, it is definitely a genuinely different approach than in the past. One group is working together, and both artists and artistic initiatives and collectives from the entire world were invited who follow similar approaches. And they were able to exchange in the entire preparation process. This is quite different to what happened in the past and where artists so far did not necessarily meet or exchange. All these collectives involved here have been founded after 2000. So they all follow quite new and innovative positions. They are really deeply rooted in their communities, and in their communities work together with others. And this leads to seeing the entire Documenta rather as a voyage, as a trip. And the Documenta itself is not the only aim, but the entire voyage there is Documenta in itself. There is also an ecological and social approach, which means that is carried quite broadly. Of course, when you talk about these things, it sounds really abstract. But in this edition, we have a very concrete approach because we're creating areas in which people can come together and participate. Of course, there is also art as such. We are also, another important aspect is also the fact that these artworks live in the long term, but there is also the aspect of living art. And if you look into the past, you have the Huguenoten house in the past of another edition. In one of these Huguenot houses, there was an artist who lived there, and it is a little bit going into this direction, but there's not just one artist, but always an entire group behind what's happening at Documenta 15. Thank you very much. As Minister Dorn said, limitations due to the pandemic were not making things easy for the artists, and it was not easy for them to create their artworks. But luckily this summer artists could come to Kassel. They could, for the first time ever, get to know the area. Could you tell us something about that? Well, yeah, it's really an interesting moment in time. We see people coming together, meeting for the first time. One Gruppe had started by doing a mapping from Kassel, which means getting to know the city, putting priorities, and from there also get to know new areas of Kassel. As you said, for example, the press conference was in the east of Kassel, which is for the very first time one of the areas of interest for a Documenta in an industrial building from the 1980s. And we have 700,000 square meters of an industrial building that are handed over literally to us by someone there. And we also go to Friedrichsplatz towards Fulda into the east, which is literally a zone where we are expanding into, and the collective, the artistic collective, are therefore moving into areas of Kassel that have not been seen as priorities so far. What's also happening is that the positions of the artists that have been created digitally, well, the artists now are actually moving into Kassel in person. And this means also that we have people on place more and more, and it's really interesting to see that. And there will be very interesting positions. The artists are discovering more and more areas that are interesting to them. So it makes everything very dynamic, and the team is having a lot of fun. Well, that's quite something new, isn't it? The traditional areas, well, there are some that are kept, but there are new areas that have been taken into the Documenta, also outside areas. What about sustainability? Is this also something that's important when the areas are selected? Or what measures are you taking in coordination with the artists to make sure that Documenta is being CO2 neutral, for example, or something like that? Are there any activities behind that? Well, sustainability, as I said, is important on two levels, both for the artists and infrastructure. On an artist level, network building within Kassel is very important. It's thus also an initiative to link with other artists and creatives from Kassel. Our hub is the Ruro House, as we call it. It's in a historical road in Kassel. And it's, so to say, the living room of the art collective where all stakeholders are invited, even now, wherever it's possible within the limits. And these private rooms, so to say, this living room, so to say, is creating also a protected room. It's a bit linked also to the past, and we want to continue the concept also after the Documenta 15, so that some of the areas and buildings that we're finding will continue to have an artistic vocation after the Documenta. It's something that we're also thinking of. Infrastructure, well, here energy, mobility, publications, printing. We have a consultant here from the University of Kassel with a sustainability concept that we're currently developing, because we're trying to make sure that the international art exhibition is more sustainable than in the past. And all partners and stakeholders are ready to take part, to bring in their own, to skip in their own competencies, and we have found wonderful solutions so far. Wonderful. We're looking forward to seeing all of this next year. You have also said that there's a participative character and that the city of Kassel has already been taken on board with this concept of the living room. And some have said that Documenta 15 will be a big happening with sit-ins and a living exchange, and that maybe this could lead to art being neglected. I am sure that even during the Documenta 15 we'll experience art, even if it might not be just statically a picture on a wall somewhere or a sculpture behind glass, but I think there will be artistic positions that are not just having a political character. I would be happy if you could mention some examples of artistic groups or artists who have some renown in the world. Well, I had to smile a little bit because Juan Grupa, of course, ironically, has also created a workshop called Where is the Art? And so, as you can see, the question that you asked is exactly also what is in their head. But in Indonesia, a lambang, or the collective is working, or a lambang is constructed or is built with 3 spaces. So you have a collective area also where you meet, and you have the storage area for the crops and the 3rd space. And in the Documenta 15 itself, you will also have these 3 spaces. So there will be the architectural space where you can meet and where all the happenings are taking place. There's the private area, which is the true work of art. And then you have the area of archives and storage, so to say. So you have the same 3 areas as you would have in an Indonesian lambang. And of course, there are also famous artists, project artworks from England, which have been nominated for an important award. Beginning of December, these elections will be done. They work a lot with neurological problems and are creating art around that. There's a Cuban artistic group with Tania Bruguera. She's a very famous artist who is here actually blending into the group. Ritu Atrast from Bangladesh, who have also already been represented a lot. It's also an artistic collective. They are dealing with food for the Documenta and with the principle of zero waste. I think this is a trend that will be presented a lot. There will be a lot of cooking. There's really a big focus on nutrition and food. Wow, that sounds so interesting and captivating. And so many societal topics seem to be represented that are interesting to us all. So it really sounds like a documenta that might attract persons who are not just interested in art, but also who like to reflect societal challenges and links, and where we can feel that we actually deal with our society, with nature, with our resources, with Mother Earth, where we can also learn to treat them differently. And artistic positions can give really great impact and be an engine and give us courage to maybe abandon one thing and instead move into something else and also learn to like something else. Now, of course, within the pandemic, where we do not know how it will develop next year, we cannot simply think that all international art lovers will be able to come to Kassel. Are you planning something in the digital area, so that people from South America, Asia, etc., if they cannot travel to Germany, so that they can also take part in the exhibition? First of all, I agree with you. I'm also convinced that's a really important documenta that will deal with so many questions that are important for us all, especially within climate change and other catastrophes that are to be seen more and more everywhere. So I think it will also give us the opportunity to see something else in a different way and reorganize our way of living together. And in order for the entire world to take part in this, of course, there will be a digital approach as well. There will be some digital format. For example, there will be possibilities to book a digital walk through the exhibition when you cannot come there. However, it's not a purely digital documenta, because we and Guadalupe, we are all convinced that art needs direct contact, and that this concept can only actually take place when we come together. Of course, there are many different measures that we have already included into the planning that would allow us to hold the documenta in case of a continuation of the pandemic, so that people can be there live without running any risks. Of course, we are continuously monitoring the situation and thinking of such alternative solutions. But we're really looking forward to having guests from the entire world, so that on the 18th of June, they can come to Kassel.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Schormann. You have really dealt with huge challenges and are dealing with huge challenges. But I think with this enthusiasm and this optimism that you and the artists have, this will be really an incredible documenta. I will definitely be there, even if I have to come with my bike. Thank you very much. So,
Professor Bude, we are now entering the second part of this documenta. 1 year ago, you were nominated, and you are now building up an institute that wants to occupy itself of Documenta, and I would like to know if you can tell us something about this institute, which is not related to university. Why does Documenta need an institute? Well, that's an interesting question, I have to say. And the plans have been there already in the 60s, because we had that idea with a lot of names that tried to go ahead with that, like Theodor Adorno, for example. The interesting thing in the history is, in the story, the formula to have a museum below the earth, because we have the picture of the museum, and we say it's a museum that is lasting for some time. Now the question is, what does the museum do that in 100 days is part of the documenta? What do they do for things that are collected? So which is the archive of Documenta? There are a lot of traces from the different expositions with different documents, but obviously this kind of archive, the concepts of the different documentas, the way how each exposition reacted on the other, and which structure we can still find in the relationship to each other, but also as far as the world is concerned, where we like to try to think about globalization. Now, the Documenta Institute, this construction of the Documenta is important for us in order to have this archive of this very particular museum. But this is not only an archive of the things, of the artworks, it is also an archive of reflections, of concepts, what depends also of the different images. Only a small example that might be interesting for you. The Documenta 14 has tried to show the unity of Europe thanks to division in Kassel and Athens. And this Documenta is reacting on that and says, no, we don't have to part something to show that it belongs together. We have to put it together, and we can think that the collective we are talking about wants to have a social healing. And if you see only this picture, then you can understand what kind of questions are connected and part of Documenta. And obviously, at a certain point, you have to ask, which is your collection, the collection of Documenta? And we can say that the Documenta Institute is the collecting archive of Documenta. Thank you very much. The Institute is therefore they will show the 100 days. They will be present all the time. And as you said, it's a Documenta archive that is existing since some time, and they are part of the Documenta Institute. What can the archive do for the research program? Well, this is something very important, because you might see it in the following way. We have a vertical line where we look how the Documenta react to each other and how the Documenta was conceived. For example, as far as national DNS times and from different things that came up, and we didn't even know that they had a role, that we are trying to have this vertical line of the model of Documenta. This is one important line. But there is also a horizontal line, the history in the worldwide copy, or in the idea to be related to each other. And we now have this kind of a biennale of the world. There are so many in the whole world. It's not only done every 2 years. It is but the model of Documenta, how did this get bigger and bigger, and is still expanding? And we are trying to see how this model of Documenta worked in the whole world, what were the inputs, and we should see what does it mean to talk about actual real-time art, because there is an emancipation. It's not modern art. It's art that might not even be realized by us as art. So everything should be art. And therefore, where is the aesthetic difference? Or like Mrs. Schormann said very clearly with Juanuta, the social self is becoming aesthetic. And we should ask ourselves, what does this mean? Is this aesthetic of the social part, or is it like undermining everything? All these questions are so important in order to understand how the real time can be real, because this is the important part in the form of realizing what we have. People want to see and understand their reality, their present, and they probably also want to develop other impulses and ideas. We have digitalization, manipulation, and also demographic change. But what does this mean? And this is one of the very important questions. It is the realization of what is real and present in the moment. That's very interesting. So you showed us and told us that Documenta Exposition is the mother of the many biennales and triennales in the whole world, and Documenta is, apart from Venice, I would say, one of the eldest expositions we have, and the Documenta Institute might also give an impulse for other regions in order to see how art is changing as a social moment, how this changes our present, giving new inputs. So we are looking forward to that. But you are developing this program not on your own alone. You also have 3 further professors in Kassel, and all the places are taken. Can you tell us something about the profiles of these people? This is a very important point. We do have different aspects, and we try to cover that. On the one hand, the knowledge, how art can create knowledge, and how this knowledge is entering in society. And then we also have the situation of the Documenta in the societal situation, and in different aspects. And then we have the question if art is not also something economical. Not only that we have art that is traded, but is there also something related to the artists? And these are the very important parts that are covered by our professors, and I'm very happy that we can see this because we have one colleague. She is coming from Latin America, and she is very interested in the question what the relationship of rights, human rights, law and art have to be considered. It's the performance of human rights. What is happening there in the whole world? And then another colleague, she is coming from China, and she is considering the practices of expositions of the economic aspect, and therefore she has a whole horizon with different points in art, like, let's see, the Asian part of the question, the upcoming countries. And a third colleague who is representing the European part. He is German and has studied in Switzerland. And I guess this is a very important and well-working part, because both of the ladies are considering the Documenta Institute. They are quite young, and I guess that they might come with an impulse that has already been mentioned by Mrs. Schormann, that this art is entering society and becoming art, and this see this from different aspects, because it's different in China in respect to Havana. Or in Eastern Germany, it might mean something different than in Western Germany. And all these questions are very important also in order to understand how the present becomes the present. Well, that sounds as we might lose our Western-oriented view, and yeah, welcome people from other countries, other traditions, in order also to understand where our blocking blocks are, and how other societies consider art and living together. And it's not only that we understand ourselves better, it's to understand the whole thing better. And I guess it is really that Europe will have only 8% of the world's population, so we can't start from the point of view that everything that is important is coming from here, and therefore the different traditions are very important for Documenta. But Kassel and the Documenta Institute should be the knot of this network where the participants are researching, and we want the Documenta Institute not in Shanghai or Havana, but in Kassel itself. Now, you are working with the researchers that you presented, and you work on a program about which you were already speaking, a vertical and a horizontal line. Maybe you can explain it a little bit more in concrete, because you will present it in autumn, and then you get a go if you should go ahead, and I guess it will be like that. And maybe you can also be a little bit more concrete. Which are the topics that you are considering, and if there are some particular pillars? Well, I try it with one tendency that is something we can see, because from the beginning, Documenta is related to East-West, and as the language of the Western world. And the modern part was not that important. Europe was the important thing, and the idea that this good Western art and not a problematic Eastern art. And a very important question was how this Eastern and Western part can come together, and which the differences might be. And these are topics that we have seen in different documentas. And then we said we are not only understand it from the east-west, but we should also have the option to see it north and south. So it's like we completed the horizon in this documenta showings. And this is to understand what this means for the singular art and how these expositions can be seen. And if you have this horizon in the different angles of the world, when we talk now about north and south, is east-west not important anymore? These are things that we should keep in mind, that we should consider, and this is also one of the very important lines that we see in the work of the Documenta, that here we also have the time after the war. Documenta 10 was very important here, with a new outlook on the world, and we can probably say that in the Documenta exposition we also can see what happened after the Second World War. These are things that are very important that we are considering, but also which kind of approach we have, the kind of art handling. What is happening before we can show something in an exposition? But this exposition is a product with a long procedure, and sometimes you don't understand the product because you don't know the process, the procedure that led to this. This is also the developing of such an exposition. So this is something we are considering at the Documenta Institute. This is all very interesting, sounds very interesting, as well, obviously, the perspective of the Documenta in a world where we were in the Cold War, so we had the East-West contrast, and then in a time where we are now considering the North-South relationship, and obviously informations are very quick. We can have informations about every angle of the world every day. We can see wars on time, and this is the present for so many people in the world, and therefore also Documenta is changing also with the critical aspects, the political structures. This seems to be clear, and therefore the Institute has a huge program as far as research is concerned, but also as far as we have to do in our society. It's not that you are working behind the curtains, but you want to enter in inside of the society where you want give the citizens the opportunity to have discussions, to see your artworks, and therefore we are curious to see all this. Now I have a question for both of you. What do you think will this work of the Documenta Institute have any relationship with the Documenta itself? With the work of the Institute, maybe also interesting points that we can pick up. We already have this effect between the archive and the positions, as the professor said, and what you said, Ms. Romahn, and we have also the leading part in the previous documentas, and where we can have a break or even a strong connection. And in this context, the archive is an important partner that gives us a lot of interesting points. And the scientific part with Documenta 10, we already mentioned it. The Documenta is never far away from science, but is active on very many points. If it was artistic research with results, or sometimes even in a very pragmatical way, as I told you, with sustainability. For example, the visitors or other topics, they that should be there. And from our point of view, we would like to have and see that this might be even stronger and get stronger, obviously considering the history of Documenta and the in the society itself. And a system that is getting stronger from both sides. And the colleague Gomez is a part with a project, a summer school, a part of the Documenta 15, and you see that science itself considered of a group of people. They went to Mrs. Gomez and said, well, can't we do something about that? And this is something that is coming from the artistic part itself. And this is a very interesting point that tells us something about present art. And this might be a formula that might be characteristic for the whole Documenta Institute, that you can do art if you are not only doing or preparing art. And this is a point we should think about, what this means for society, art, but also for the historical situation we are in. Similar to Mr. Bude, Mrs. Gomez has a lot of connecting lines. We have have also a scientific project that is connected to the archive, and then in different universities that are connected. We have camp, then we have a sustainability project in Indonesia with the University of Göttingen. Where we have Mr. Finkedai from Kassel, and the way like the projects that were initiated by the artists, they will be there, and they will be there in a major number. That's interesting. Documenta as an exposition is in the network since ages, and many people are coming and are presenting their works. I guess that Documenta Institute is trying to see which influence art has on society, history, and so on. or that you might create a network with other institutes or are already doing something in that field. Can you already say something about that? The specific access is the exposition. What does this mean? The exposition of the world, not only that you are writing a book or shooting a film, but it's the exposition itself. And from this position of the exposition, we have connections to all the things that you find in studies. We have curators that are prepared. They are prepared to make expositions. And one of the questions is, what does it mean to have this access? And this is far more than only art. And we have connections not only to the curators and the different university curricula, but we also have the question, what does this part mean? And there we do have Max Planck Institute for Aesthetics in Frankfurt. There we try to give a different accent where both institutes are working in art, but for us is our point is the exposition, and they have other questions like aesthetics and participations. This is a bridge with different aspects that are put together, and they might also be at a similar point, and it's art for society. As we already have Documenta in very many fields, so we have disconnections at an international level. In other parts of scientific part, we have different topics that are considered, and this was very important also for Documenta, like publications. These have given something news, how Documenta is seen, and we have also the questions of international relevant questions in around archives, and how with a digital approach you can have things that are coming from the different contexts here. We have really a lot of things that are waiting for us, and the Documenta and the Institute and the archive are, from my point of view, a really important job, and therefore being connected to Documenta. Thank you very much, Mr. Schormann, Mr. Bude, and it was very interesting. This gives new perspectives for the Documenta and the Institute, and the connection we have for both of them. Now, we are looking forward to the Documenta next year, and we hope that the further planning will be positive, and that the pandemic or the endemic will allow us to have a lot of people on the spot to see how the Documenta 15 is presenting itself. I say thank you. I didn't receive any questions from the people that are connected from home, but I wish you all the best and see you very soon. Yes, and next year we see each other in Kassel. Thank you very much. You're invited. Please come to Kassel and see on the spot how all these things will then be realized. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.